luggage, and told him her destination, the Anderson Ranch 12 miles past the fork, where the red clay road died into hard caliche and scrub. He'd looked at her the way men look at women who don't understand the territory. The second time was when they hit the last stretch, and he pulled back on the reins and said without ceremony, "End of my route, miss. You walk from here, or you don't go." Olivia Barnes walked. She carried her own bag. She did not ask for help. She had learned somewhere between the home that turned her out and the agency office that processed her file with barely concealed pity, that asking for help was the first step toward owing something she didn't intend to owe. The bag was heavy. She didn't put it down. By the time she reached the gate, a weathered timber frame with the letters J. A burned into the crossbeam in letters that had gone gray and cracked at the edges. She could feel the dust in her teeth and the heat pressing against the back of her neck like a hand. She stopped, took one long breath, looked at the property that sprawled out before her. The main house sat low and wide, built from pale riverstone and timber that had once been good quality and was now held together by habit more than anything else. The yard was scattered fence posts that leaned without falling a water trough with a crack running its full length held together with a length of wire twisted tight. A kitchen garden that had gone mostly to weeds, except for 3 stubborn rows of something she thought might be beets. 2 horses stood in the corral watching her with the passive interest of animals who had seen everything. A dog barked once from somewhere behind the barn and then went silent. It was a ranch that had been fighting itself for a while. She could see that in 10 seconds. She walked through the gate and up to the house. She was halfway up the porch steps when the door opened, and the man filled it. She had to give him that exactly what the agency paperwork had said. John Anderson, known as Jack, 6'4", 230 pounds, rancher widower, no children listed. What the paperwork had not said was that he had the look of a man who had been working himself past exhaustion long enough that exhaustion had become his resting state. His shoulders were broad, but carried forward. His eyes, which were a steady, unreadable gray, moved over her with the quick efficiency of someone assessing a situation for danger before he assessed it for anything else. She watched him run through his calculations. She was used to it. Small he was clocking. 5'3" maybe. Slight, young, female. She let him finish. "Hartwell Agency sent me," she said before he could open his mouth. "I cook, I keep house, I manage whatever needs managing. My name is Olivia Barnes. I have references from the Hartwell office, 2 previous placements, and I can start today." She reached into the inside pocket of her coat and produced a folded envelope. "You can read these or not. I'll tell you the same things they say." He looked at the envelope. He looked at her. He did not move from the doorway. "How old are you?" he said. His voice was low, not unfriendly, just careful. 26. "You come out here alone?" "Yes." "From where?" "Flagstaff originally. The agency office in Tucson most recently." He took the envelope. He didn't open it yet. He was still looking at her, and she got the sense that he was not a man who trusted paper as much as he trusted what he could see in front of him, which she respected because she was the same way. "My last cook left in May," he said. "Before that, I had a woman come 3 days a week from town. That arrangement ended." A pause. "The kitchen is not in good condition." "I've worked in worse." "The ranch is short-handed. I've got 2 hands right now, Cutter and Roy, and they're men who work hard and complain hard in equal measure. You'd be the only woman on the property." "I understand that. It gets isolated in winter." "Mr. Anderson?" She kept her voice even, not sharp but direct. "I'm aware of the conditions. The agency told me what you needed, and I applied because I meet those requirements. I'm not here because I had easier options. I'm here because I want to work and this position is open. If that's acceptable to you, I'll start on the kitchen today. If it isn't, I'll need to know now so I can make other arrangements before dark." Something shifted in his face. Not a smile. It was more the flicker of a man who had been braced for a different kind of conversation and had not gotten it. He stepped back from the doorway. "Come in," he said. "I'll put coffee on." "I'll put the coffee on," she said, walking past him. "You can tell me where things are." The kitchen was, as he had warned her, not in good condition. But it was not the worst she had seen. The range was a good one, a heavy cast iron monarch, with 6 burners, the kind built to last a generation, and it was caked with grease that had been allowed to go cold and rank, but the iron itself was sound. The shelves held supplies in a state of indifferent disorder. Flour bags pushed to the back tins, stacked without system. A coffee grinder sitting in a drift of grounds that hadn't been wiped down in weeks. The floor was swept, but not mopped. The window above the wash basin had a crack in the lower pane, stuffed with a rag. She set her bag down on the kitchen table and did not comment on any of it. "Coffee's in the tin on the second shelf," Jack said from the doorway. He had the manner of a man who wasn't sure whether to stay or go and had settled on watching. She found the tin, found the grinder, found the pot. She worked quickly and without fuss. He watched her light the range with a certainty that told him she had done it 1,000 times, and watched her pour water from the pump into the pot with the economy of someone who did not waste motion. "How long has the trough been cracked?" she asked without turning around. "A beat. Since March. The wire is holding for now, but it'll give before winter. You'll want to replace the trough or seal it properly." She set the pot on the burner. "The garden can be recovered. The weeds haven't taken the root structure yet. If you want to try." "I haven't had time." "I understand. I'm just telling you what I see." She turned then and looked at him directly. "I'm not criticizing, Mr. Anderson. I'm telling you what I can do." He pulled a chair out from the table and sat down, which was the first time she had seen him stop moving since she arrived. He set her envelope on the table and finally opened it. She let him read while she checked the stove's temperature and found 2 cups on the shelf that were clean enough. She washed them anyway. He read the letters slowly. She could tell he was the kind of man who read everything twice. "Margaret Holt," he said. "She ran a working ranch outside of Prescott, 12 hands. I was there 14 months. She writes that you reorganized her supply ordering and saved her considerable money. Her previous arrangements had her paying 2 separate merchants for the same goods. I consolidated." He folded the first letter and opened the second. "Elias Drummond, lumber operations. Camp cook and supply manager for 30 men. 8 months. He looked up. 30 men. Yes. And you're telling me 2 ranch hands are going to be a problem?" "I didn't say they'd be a problem." He almost smiled. It didn't quite make it to his face, but she saw it in the way the line around his eyes changed. He closed the envelope and set it aside. "The pay is $12 a month, meals provided from ranch stores, your own room off the kitchen." The agency listed 14. The agency listed 14 as the upper range for an experienced placement. "I have experience. You have references?" "Which document the experience?" They looked at each other across the kitchen table. The coffee had begun to produce the first sounds of approaching heat from the pot. 13, he said. 13.5, she said, "and I'll fix the trough." He was quiet for a moment. "You know how to repair a water trough." "I know how to seal stone and iron. The method's the same." He picked up the envelope again, turned it over once in his big hands, set it back down. 13.5, he said. "And we'll see about the trough when you've shown me what it looks like." "Fair," she said. She turned back to the stove. "How do you take your coffee?" "Black." "Good," she said. "Because I haven't found the sugar yet, and I'm not sure it's here." She met Roy and Cutter at supper. Roy was in his 50s, a spare, leather-faced man who had the wary eyes of someone who had learned not to get attached to anything on a working ranch because things changed too fast. He sat down, looked at the plate Olivia set in front of him, and said nothing. Cutter was younger by a decade, heavier, with a jaw that seemed designed for argument. He sat down, looked at the plate, looked at Olivia and said, "We had beans last Tuesday." "You have beans tonight," Olivia said, "and salt pork and cornbread and stewed tomatoes from the last of the tins on the second shelf. If the garden produces by September, you'll have fresh. Eat or don't." Roy picked up his fork. Cutter stared at her for another moment, and then he picked up his fork too. Jack across the table said nothing. But she noticed he was watching Cutter, and the watching had a quality to it, a quiet readiness that told her he had been prepared to intervene if she needed it, and that he had concluded she did not. She sat at the end of the table and ate with the men. She had learned that establishing that practice early mattered. If she ate apart, she became staff. If she ate at the table, she became part of the operation. On a working ranch, the difference was significant. "Cornbread's good," Roy said at length. "Thank you," Olivia said. "He's not wrong," Cutter said, almost like it cost him something. She refilled his coffee without comment. After supper, she found Jack in the yard checking the corral fence. The sun was going down in the way it went down in that country, fast and violent and beautiful, the sky running through red to deep violet before the dark closed in. She stood at the edge of the light from the house and said, "I'll need 2 things tomorrow." He looked at her over his shoulder. "Go ahead. I need to go through your supply records, whatever you have, receipts, order sheets, anything. And I need to know what the kitchen garden was originally planted with, so I know what's salvageable. Supply records are in the desk in the front room. They're not organized. That's all right? The garden." He turned fully. "My wife planted it. Before she passed. I can tell you what she had in it. Only if it's not a difficulty to talk about it." He looked at her for a moment. There was something in his face she didn't push at. "Tomatoes," he said. "Beans, carrots. She had herbs along the south side. I don't know which ones. Some things I don't know the names of." "I'll sort out what's still living," she said, "and I'll try to keep what she started." He turned back to the fence. She thought the conversation was over. Then he said without looking at her, "She died 2 winters ago. This place has been—" He stopped, started again. "It's been harder to keep up." "I understand," Olivia said. "I wasn't sure about sending to the agency," he said. "I wasn't sure it was the right kind of solution. And now?" He pulled the fence wire taut and fastened it before he answered. "Ask me in a week," he said. She nodded and went back inside. She sat at the kitchen table with a lamp and the supply receipts for 2 hours, making notes in her own hand, cross-referencing what was in the pantry against what he'd been ordering, finding the gaps and the redundancies. The ranch was bleeding money slowly, not catastrophically, but consistently. Unnecessary freight costs, orders from distant merchants when local sources existed, stores that had been allowed to spoil from poor rotation. She could fix most of it by the end of the month. She was still at the table when she heard Jack's boots on the porch, heard the door, heard him stop when he saw the lamp still burning. "You should sleep," he said. "I will," she said. "I want to finish this first." He stood for a moment in the doorway between the main room and the kitchen. "What are you finding?" "That you're paying more than you need to for freight. There's a merchant in Coulter Springs who stocks the same flour and cornmeal as the Tucson shipper, and you don't pay the wagon fee." "I didn't know about the Coulter Springs merchant." "I'll write him a letter tomorrow, with your permission." He leaned against the doorframe and looked at her. This slight woman, surrounded by his papers and receipts, completely at ease in a kitchen she had walked into 6 hours ago, reorganizing his operation with the quiet confidence of someone who did this the way other people breathe. "Permission granted," he said. "Good night, Mr. Anderson." "Jack," he said. "Nobody calls me Mr. Anderson." She looked up. "Good night, Jack." He went to bed. She listened to his footsteps move down the hall. Then she turned back to her receipts and kept working until she had everything she needed. She woke before dawn. There were habits you built when you had been on your own long enough, and waking before the rest of the world was one of them. It gave you an hour that belonged to no one, an hour where you were not yet visible, not yet being measured. She valued that hour more than she could have explained to anyone. She lit the range. She mixed biscuit dough. She put the coffee on and stood at the cracked window while it heated, looking out at the yard where the horses were shadows against the pre-dawn gray, and thought about the trough and the garden and the supply ledger and the 14 things she needed to accomplish in the first week. She was not afraid. She had never been much given to fear, which some people found unsettling in a woman her size. She had simply learned early that fear was an expense she couldn't afford. She was on her second biscuit batch when she heard Roy come in. He stopped in the kitchen doorway, same as Jack had the night before. She was beginning to understand that doorway was a place men stood to assess situations before they committed to them. "You're up early," he said. "So are you," she said. "Sit down. Coffee's ready." He sat. She put a cup in front of him. He wrapped both hands around it the way men do when they've been cold. "How long have you been here?" she asked, sliding biscuits into the oven. 3 years, Roy said. "Came on when Jack's wife was still living. She was a good woman." A pause. "Ranch went different after." "I imagine it did. He works too hard," Roy said, which was, she thought, an oddly direct thing for a ranch hand to say about his employer. But she understood it. You worked beside a man long enough you stopped being able to watch him grind himself down without saying something even to a stranger who might listen. "I'll do what I can," she said. Roy was quiet for a moment, turning his cup. "Cutter's not always easy," he said. "It's not personal. There was a woman he was waiting on who didn't come, last spring. He's not easy with women around right now." "Thank you for telling me," she said. He shrugged as if he wasn't sure why he had. She gave him the first biscuits out of the oven and left him to his coffee. By the end of the first day, she had written the letter to the Coulter Springs merchant, cleared and inventoried the entire pantry, planned 2 weeks of meals against available stores, and pulled the worst of the weeds from the first row of the kitchen garden. She had also, with a length of rawhide from the barn and a bucket of the lime mix she found behind the water pump, made the first repair to the cracked trough, a temporary measure, she told Jack when he came to see it, but it would hold until she could get the proper materials to do it right. Jack stood looking at the trough for a long time. "Where'd you learn to do that?" he said. "The camp I worked before this had a water problem every spring," she said. "You fix it enough times, you learn what holds." He looked at her. The sun was long and late behind him, and it caught the dust on her work dress and the damp on her hands from the lime work, and she thought she probably looked like something he hadn't expected to find on his property. "The trough held through supper," he said. "The horses didn't have any trouble. It'll hold through the week," she said. "Then we do it properly." He nodded. He turned to go in. Then he stopped. "Olivia." She waited. "The biscuits this morning," he said. He didn't finish the sentence. "I'll make them again Friday," she said. He walked inside. She stayed in the yard a moment longer, looking out at the range where the last of the light was lying flat and golden across the dry grass, and thought, this is a good place. It had been a good place, and it could be again. She could feel it the way she felt things practically specifically, without sentiment, but not without care. She was going to make this work, not because she had to, not because she had nowhere else to go, though that was partly true, but because she had walked through that gate and seen what this place had been fighting to hold on to. And she understood that fight in a way she couldn't explain, and she intended to help it win. She picked up her tools and went inside. The letter to the Coulter Springs merchant went out on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Olivia had a reply. She was standing at the range when Jack came through the kitchen door at noon, and she handed him the letter without preamble. He read it while she ladled stew into bowls. "He'll match the Tucson price and deliver to the Fork Road every other Friday," she said. "No freight surcharge if the order's above $8. We'll clear that easily." Jack set the letter down on the table. "How'd you know he'd negotiate?" "I didn't," she said. "But I wrote the letter like I did." He sat down and looked at the letter again, and she could see him doing the arithmetic in his head, the same arithmetic she had already done twice, because she didn't like to give a man numbers she wasn't certain of. The savings were not dramatic. They were steady. And steady was what this ranch needed. "That's roughly $4 a month," he said. $4.60 on the current ordering pattern. More if we adjust the flour order to account for what I can produce from the garden by August." He looked up at her. "You've already planned the August ordering." "I've planned through October," she said. "I can show you the sheet after supper if you want." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Show me now," She brought the ledger sheet from the shelf where she had been keeping her notes and spread it on the table beside his stew bowl. He ate and read at the same time, which told her he was a man who did not like to stop either activity for the sake of the other. She refilled his coffee without being asked and waited while he worked through her figures. "You've got a line here for medicinal stores," he said. "The kit in the front room is short on carbolic and clean linen. Ranch work produces injuries. It's cheaper to keep the kit current than to make emergency trips to town." He tapped the line with one finger. "My wife kept the kit," he said. "It came out flat the way men say things they haven't said aloud in a while." "I'll keep it going forward," Olivia said, "if that's acceptable." He closed the ledger. "Add what you need to the next order." She took the ledger back and made a note while he finished his stew. From the yard, she could hear Cutter's voice sharp and carrying. The way it always was when he wanted to be heard through walls, telling Roy something about the south fence line and a post that had rotted through at the base. She heard Roy's lower reply, and then the sound of boots crossing the yard fading. "How's Cutter treating you?" Jack asked. He said it without looking up from his bowl. "He's fine," she said. "Olivia." She turned. He was looking at her now, steady and direct. "He's adjusting," she said. "He'll come around. Men like Cutter adjust when they see the work, not when they're told to." Jack nodded slowly. "You've handled men like that before." "In a camp of 30, you handle every kind," she said. "He's not the worst I've seen. Not by a long way." She put his emptied bowl in the wash basin. She heard him push his chair back. "I'll look at the south fence," he said. "The post will need replacement, not repair," she said. "The ground's been wet near the creek. Anything that's been in there more than 5 years is probably the same." He stopped, looked at her. "How do you know where the wet ground is?" "I walked the south boundary yesterday morning," she said, "before breakfast." Another pause. Longer this time. "You walked the boundary?" "I wanted to know the property." He stood in the doorway of the kitchen. That doorway again. That place where the men of this ranch seemed to stop and recalibrate, and looked at her with an expression she had seen building for 3 days and hadn't been able to name until this moment. It was not surprise exactly. It was the look of a man who had been carrying something too heavy for too long and had just for the first time felt someone else put a hand under it. He didn't say anything. He put his hat on and went out. She turned back to the wash basin and scrubbed the bowl and felt something settle in her chest that was close to satisfaction. The storm came on a Saturday. It came the way desert storms came, without much warning and with everything it had. She heard the wind shift at mid-morning, felt the temperature drop, and went to find Jack. He was in the barn with Cutter checking the horses. "Storm's coming," she said from the barn door. Cutter looked at her with the particular expression he kept for moments when she said something he'd already thought of. "We know. The trough repair won't hold in a hard rain," she said. "The pressure from the runoff will push through the lime seal. We need to move the horses to the far stall before it comes down and redirect the roof water away from that side." Cutter opened his mouth. Jack said, "She's right. Let's move." It was the first time Jack had cut Cutter off in her favor, and she noticed the way Cutter's jaw tightened. She moved past it. There wasn't time. They moved the horses in 20 minutes. She directed the water diversion, a channel dug with a flat spade from the barn's east gutter to the drainage ditch she had cleared of debris 2 days prior. Roy dug without comment. Cutter dug with considerably more comment, most of it directed at the ground rather than at her, which she accepted as progress. She got back to the kitchen with 10 minutes before the storm hit full force, enough time to check that the window rag was packed tight, shift the flour sacks off the bottom shelf in case the floor took water, and put a second pot of coffee on because men who came in soaked and cold needed something warm, and they needed it fast. The storm hit hard for 40 minutes and then broke clean. When Jack came in dripping from hat brim to boot, he went straight to the stove and stood in front of it with both hands out. Roy came in behind him just as wet. Cutter lost his expression, carrying the aftermath of a man who had worked hard and was not willing to admit he felt better for it. She handed Jack a towel and a coffee mug. He took both. "Trough," she said. "Held," he said. Barely. But it held. "I'll do the proper repair Monday." Cutter took a mug from the shelf himself, which was the first time he'd done that, rather than waiting for her to hand it to him. She said nothing about it. "The channel you had us dig," Roy said, settling into his chair, "kept the barn floor dry. We've had floods in that barn 2 years running." "Good drainage placement," she said. "The gutter angle was doing the work wrong." Roy looked at Cutter. Cutter drank his coffee. Jack turned from the stove. The warmth had put color back in his face, and his wet hair was dark against his forehead, and he looked, she thought, like a man who was more alive than he'd been an hour ago. "Where did you learn drainage?" he said. "The Drummond camp," she said. "Spring melt every year. If you don't route the water roots itself, usually through somewhere you don't want." "You should have been an engineer," Roy said. "I should have been a lot of things," she said, and she said it lightly, without weight, but she felt Jack's eyes on her for a moment longer than the comment warranted, and she didn't meet them. She put biscuits on. Men who'd worked through a storm ate like they were making up for lost time. It was Roy who told her about Dale Mercer. She was in the garden on the following Wednesday, on her knees in the dirt with her hands in the soil, working out what had survived the storm more than she'd expected, which was the good news when Roy came and stood at the garden fence with a look that said he had something to say and was weighing how to say it. "There's a man in town," Roy said. "Name of Mercer, Dale Mercer. He's been buying up range land south of here for 2 years. She sat back on her heels and looked at him. "And he's been after Jack to sell. Before you came. After Jack's wife died when things were hard. Mercer came around 3 times with offers." Roy folded his arms on the top rail. "Jack said no all 3 times. But Mercer didn't stop." "Mercer's the kind of man who doesn't stop," Roy said. "He's got a lawyer in Tucson he uses to find weak points. Water rights, tax records, survey disputes. He finds a thread and he pulls it." Olivia looked at the beets pushing through the dark soil, small and stubborn and alive. "Why are you telling me this?" Roy was quiet for a moment. "Because Jack doesn't talk about it. And because Mercer was in town last week and he was asking questions about the ranch, about changes, about who was living out here now." She absorbed that. "He knows I'm here." "Somebody told him. Towns talk." She pulled a weed out of the soil with a clean, firm motion. "Thank you, Roy." He nodded and walked back toward the barn. She stayed in the garden and thought. She thought practically the way she thought about everything: what Mercer's interest in the ranch meant, what leverage a man like that would look for, what the weak points in the Anderson operation currently were, and what she could do to shore them up before he decided to pull any threads. She worked until the sun moved off the garden. Then she went inside and found the property tax records in the bottom drawer of Jack's desk, under a hand-drawn map of the range boundaries, and a folded letter she did not read. The records were current. Jack had paid on time every year without exception. She hadn't expected otherwise, but she checked anyway. She was replacing the records when Jack came in from the range and found her at his desk. He stopped in the doorway of the front room. "The tax records are current," she said before he could ask. "I wanted to make sure. Roy told me about Mercer." A beat. Something crossed Jack's face. Not anger, not exactly. More the controlled stillness of a man deciding how to respond to having 2 conversations he'd been keeping separate suddenly become one. "Roy talks," he said, quiet, not sharp. "Roy's careful," she said. "He told me because he thought I should know. He was right." She closed the desk drawer and stood. "What's Mercer's actual play? Is it the water rights on the South Creek or something else?" Jack came into the room fully and sat down in the chair by the window, the way a man sits when he's done standing. He looked like the day had taken something from him. They often did lately. "There's a strip of land," he said, "on the south boundary, about 40 acres. The original survey had it ambiguous. The line runs through a dry creek bed that's moved twice since the survey was done. Mercer's claim is that the creek movement means the boundary moved with it. His lawyer sent a letter in March." "What did your response say?" "I haven't responded." She kept her face even. "Jack." "I know," he said. He rubbed his face with one big hand. "I know. I didn't have the money for a lawyer, and I thought if I didn't respond, the thing might lie quiet." "It won't lie quiet. Men like Mercer don't let things lie quiet." She sat down across from him. "Do you have the original survey document?" "Somewhere." "I need to find it," she said. "And I need to look at the creek boundary myself, tomorrow if you can show me where." He looked at her. "You're going to read a survey document." "I've read 2 in my working life," she said. "I'll figure out what I need to know." He was quiet for a long moment. The light from the window came across his face at a low angle, and she could see the fatigue in the lines there, the weight of a man who had been running this problem around in his head alone for months. "It's not your problem, Olivia," he said. It was the first time he had said her name without it being attached to a task or a question. Just her name. Quiet. "It's the ranch's problem," she said. "That makes it mine." He looked at her for a long time after that. Long enough that she became conscious of it and held still under it. "I'll find the survey," he said. She was at the range the next morning when Cutter came through the back door and said without greeting, "There's a rider at the gate." She turned. "Who?" "Don't know him. Dressed like a town man, riding a good horse." A pause, and then almost grudging. "He's got a leather case with him, the kind lawyers carry." She wiped her hands on her apron. "Where's Jack?" "North pasture, 20 minutes out at least." She untied her apron. "I'll go." Cutter looked at her with an expression that was complicated. "You sure that's—" "Do you want to go instead?" she said. He didn't. She walked out to the gate. The man was exactly what Cutter had described, town-dressed good horse leather case balanced across his saddle. He had the practiced pleasantness of a man who delivered difficult messages for a living and had learned to make them sound like courtesies. "Morning," he said. "I'm looking for John Anderson." "Mr. Anderson is working," she said. She stood at the gate with her hands loose at her sides. "I manage the ranch operations. Is there something I can help you with?" The man looked at her the way men in good suits looked at women who stood in front of them without apology. "I have correspondence for Mr. Anderson, from the office of Mercer Land and Cattle." "You can leave it with me," she said. "I'll see he gets it." "This is a legal document, ma'am. I was directed to deliver it personally. And Mr. Anderson is not available personally," she said. "You're welcome to wait in the yard while I send for him. It will take some time. Or you can leave the document with me, and I can assure you it will reach him before the end of the day." She paused. "That's the same assurance you'd get from his wife if he had one. I'm the closest thing to that function on this property." Something shifted in the man's courtroom face. He hadn't expected that particular framing. He held out the envelope. She took it. "Thank you," she said pleasantly. "Safe ride back to town." He rode out. She went back inside and sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. She read it twice with the same focused stillness she brought to supply ledgers and survey documents, because the language was designed to obscure, and she refused to let it. By the time she heard Jack's horse in the yard 20 minutes later, she had written a summary of the letter's contents in plain language and underlined the 3 things that actually mattered. Jack came in, and she handed him the summary first, then the letter. He read the summary. He read the letter. He set both down. "They've filed a petition with the county land office," he said. "Yes. The hearing date is September 14th. That gives us 11 weeks. "To do what?" "To find the original survey document, the creek's movement with witnesses who were here before the survey, and get the petition answered before it defaults in Mercer's favor." She looked at him steadily. "It's manageable, Jack. It's work, but it's manageable." He was quiet. His hands were flat on the table on either side of the letter, and she could see the tension in them without him making any sound at all. "I should have answered in March," he said. "Yes," she said, because lying to him about it would not help. "But March is gone. September 14th is what we have." He looked up at her then, and for the first time since she had walked through that gate with a heavy bag and a straight spine, and told him she had nowhere else to be, she saw something in his face that was not just assessment or consideration, or the professional respect one working person gives another. It was something quieter than all of that, and something more uncertain. She didn't name it. She looked back down at the letter. "I'll start on the survey tomorrow," she said. "Show me the creek boundary when the morning work is done." "All right," he said. Roy appeared in the kitchen doorway, looked at the two of them at the table with the letter between them, and said nothing. He got his coffee mug, filled it, and went back outside. Cutter came in 10 minutes later, looked at the letter, looked at Olivia, looked at Jack. "Mercer," he said. "Yes," Jack said. Cutter sat down heavily. "I knew that man was going to come back around." He turned his coffee mug in his hands, looked at Olivia. "What are we going to do?" She noticed the "we." "We're going to fight it," she said. "Properly this time." Cutter nodded. He didn't argue. He didn't give her a look that measured her against some idea of what she should be. He just nodded like a man who had decided somewhere between the storm and the drainage channel and the biscuits on a cold morning that she was someone whose answer he would accept. She turned back to the stove. She had supper to get on. She had a survey to find. She had 11 weeks and a ranch that needed her to be sharp every single day of them. She put the letter in her apron pocket and reached for the pot. They found the original survey document on a Sunday morning folded inside the back cover of a ledger from 1871 that Jack had not opened in 2 years. Olivia spread it on the kitchen table and weighted the corners with a coffee mug. A salt tin and 2 smooth stones she had picked up from the creek boundary the day Jack had walked it with her. She had been thinking about it every night since. Lying in the small room off the kitchen, listening to the ranch settle into silence, running the problem through her mind. The way she ran everything methodically from the edges, inward, looking for the thing that held it together. The survey document was hand-drawn as all the old ones were, and the ink had browned at the folds. But the lines were clear enough. And the notation beside the dry creek bed was exactly what she had hoped for. "Read this line," she said, pointing without touching the paper. Jack leaned over the table. He read it aloud slowly. "Boundary marked at the eastern bank of the seasonal creek, as recorded in the dry season of April 1871, said bank being fixed at the survey stake, driven at the base of the twin-forked juniper." He looked up. "Fixed at the survey stake," she said. "Not at the creek bed. The boundary is the stake, not the water. The creek moving doesn't move the boundary line." Jack was very still for a moment. "Mercer's lawyer is arguing the creek defines the boundary," she said. "But the document says the stake defines it. The creek is just a reference point for location. The stake is the legal marker." "Is the stake still there?" Jack said. "I don't know. I haven't found it yet. But even if it's gone, the document's language is clear. The question is whether the county land office will read it the same way." Roy, who had come in for his morning coffee and had been standing at the edge of the kitchen, listening with the patient attention of a man who knew when something important was happening, said, "There's a man in Coulter Springs, retired, name of Aldous Webb. He was a county surveyor for 20 years. Honest man, he'd read that document right." Olivia looked at Jack. Jack looked at Roy. "You think Webb would come out?" Jack said. "I think if Olivia wrote him a letter," Roy said. And there was something in his voice that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one, he'd come. She was already reaching for paper. The letter went out Monday. Webb's reply came Thursday. He would come the following Tuesday, he wrote in a hand that was formal and careful, and suggested a man who took documents seriously. He would examine the survey, walk the boundary, and provide a written opinion. He would charge a modest fee for his time and travel. Olivia showed Jack the letter at breakfast. "That's faster than I expected," Jack said. "I told him the hearing date," she said. "I also told him what Mercer's lawyer was arguing. I wanted him to know what we needed before he came so he could bring the right references." Cutter on the other side of the table said, "What happens if Webb reads the document different than you?" Then we know that before September 14th instead of on September 14th, she said, and we find another approach. Cutter absorbed this. And if there's no other approach, there's always another approach, she said. You just have to be willing to look for it past the point where it's comfortable. He looked at her for a moment, then back at his coffee. He had been doing that more often, listening to her past the point where he used to stop. Webb arrived on Tuesday as promised, driving a buckboard with a surveying kit in the back and the measured composure of a man who had spent his career making definitive statements about ambiguous ground. He was in his 60s, lean, with hands that moved with precision when he handled the survey document, spreading it on the table, running one finger along the boundary notation, reading it once, then reading it again without comment. Then he looked up at Olivia. "You read this right," he said. It was simple, direct, and it hit her in the chest like something warm. "You're certain," Jack said. "The language is unambiguous," Webb said. "The boundary is fixed at the survey stake. Any lawyer worth his fee knows that. Mercer's man is either incompetent, or he's betting you don't have the document, or won't read it correctly." He paused. "Which were you before she found it?" Jack was quiet for a beat. "The second one." Webb nodded, unsurprised. "We need to find the stake. If it's still in the ground, we mark it, photograph its position relative to the current creek bed, and I write an opinion that the county land office cannot reasonably ignore." He stood. "Show me the south boundary." They walked it. Jack, Webb, Olivia, and Roy, who came without being asked, and positioned himself at the rear with the quiet readiness of a man who wanted to witness something. Cutter stayed with the horses, but watched from the corral fence with his arms crossed in a way that was no longer hostile so much as invested. The twin-forked juniper was still there. That was the first thing. It had grown considerably in 50 years, and one of the forks had broken off in some past storm. But the base was unmistakable once you were looking for it, and it was exactly where the survey document placed it relative to the main property line. Webb knelt at the base. He cleared the ground with a flat tool from his kit. He dug carefully, methodically 2 inches down, and then 3. And then his tool struck something with a sound that was different from rock. He looked up at Olivia. She crouched beside him. The survey stake was iron-corroded dark, but solid, still driven into the ground where a surveyor had put it more than 50 years before. "There it is," Webb said. Quiet, certain. Jack, standing behind them, made a sound that she would not describe as relief because it was too large for that word. It was the sound a man makes when something he has been afraid of losing reveals itself as still standing. She did not look at him right away. She let him have the moment. "We document it today," Webb said, straightening. "I'll write my opinion tonight. You'll have it in hand before the end of the week." She was at the garden fence the following Saturday, tying up the tomato stakes that the week's wind had knocked sideways when she heard a horse at the gate that she didn't recognize. She turned. The rider was a woman well dressed by ranch country standards, which meant her riding clothes were clean and her horse was well kept. She was perhaps 40, with a handsome, composed face and the kind of posture that came from certainty about one's own position in the world. She looked at Olivia the way certain women look at women they have not expected to find somewhere. "I'm looking for Jack Anderson," she said. "He's working the north pasture," Olivia said. She kept her voice level and pleasant. "Is he expecting you?" "I'm Margaret Hale," the woman said, as though the name explained the question. "My family owns the Hale property on the east side of the county. Jack and we've been acquainted for some time." "I'll send word that you're here," Olivia said. "You're welcome to come in and wait." She showed Margaret Hale into the front room and put coffee on. She did it without haste and without stiffness, because showing either would have meant giving this woman something she had not been offered. Margaret Hale sat in the front room and looked at the house with the assessing eyes of a woman calculating what had changed and what it meant. Olivia could feel the assessment from the kitchen without seeing it. She brought the coffee in. "You're the woman from the agency," Margaret said. It was not a question. "Yes." "How long have you been here?" "Going on 6 weeks." Margaret wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at Olivia with an expression that was not unkind, but was very deliberate. "Jack has been alone a long time," she said. "Since Clara died. People in town have been concerned about him." "He works hard," Olivia said. "The ranch is in good order." "I can see that," Margaret said. "Things look different, better." She paused. "That's down to you, I imagine." "It's a team effort," Olivia said, a beat. "Are you planning to stay?" It was a direct question dressed in politeness, and Olivia recognized the thing underneath it. "That depends on Mr. Anderson and the terms of the placement," she said, which was true and also exactly as much as she intended to give. They heard Jack's boots on the porch. He came in and stopped when he saw Margaret Hale, and Olivia watched his face run through something quickly surprise, and then a careful social pleasantness that was not the same thing as warmth. "Margaret," he said, "I didn't know you were coming out." "I was passing through," she said, which Olivia suspected was not entirely true. "I heard things had changed out here. I wanted to see for myself." She smiled. "Clearly they have. Your Miss Barnes has made quite a difference." "She has," Jack said. He looked at Olivia briefly. "Has she been taken care of?" "Yes," Margaret said. "She's been very hospitable." Olivia excused herself to the kitchen and let them talk. She did not listen exactly, but she was in the next room, and voices carried, and she heard enough to understand Margaret Hale was a woman who had been waiting in the patient way of women who know how to wait, to see whether Jack Anderson would eventually need someone to step into the vacancy his wife had left. She was kind about it. She was subtle. But the intent was there, and Jack, from what Olivia could hear, was polite and cordial and gave her nothing. Margaret left after an hour. Jack came into the kitchen and stood at the counter with his coffee and didn't say anything for a moment. "Old family friend," Olivia said. "Something like that," Jack said. She didn't push. She went back to the tomatoes on the counter that needed sorting. "She's not wrong that people in town talk," he said. "About the ranch, about changes here." "People talk about what they can see," Olivia said. "That's normal." "Some of the talk isn't friendly," he said. "There are people who think—" He stopped, started again. "There are people who think it isn't appropriate. A woman out here alone in this position." She set down the tomato she was holding and turned around. "Is that something that concerns you?" He looked at her steadily. "No," he said. "But I thought you should know it's being said." "I appreciate that," she said. "It doesn't change anything." "I know it doesn't," he said. "That's why I told you, not to warn you off. Just so you know, I'm aware of it and I don't give it weight." She nodded. She turned back to the tomatoes. "Thank you," she said. She said it to the counter, not to him, but he heard it. The trouble from town came not as gossip, but as action. On a Wednesday 12 days before the land office hearing, a man named Preston showed up at the ranch gate on behalf of Mercer. He was not a lawyer. He was a large, unsmiling man who delivered messages in a way that was designed to be understood below the level of the actual words. Jack was at the gate. Olivia came out because she had seen from the kitchen window that Preston's horse was blocking the gate, and Jack was standing very still in the way he stood when he was working hard not to do something. "Mr. Mercer wants you to know," Preston said, "that the petition is going forward, and that any documents you've produced since receiving the petition, any new surveys, any expert opinions will be challenged as self-interested. He's got 3 men who'll testify the creek boundary has always been understood as the property line. 3 men who work for Mercer," Jack said. 3 men in the county record," Preston said. "That's what counts at a hearing. We have the original survey document and a written opinion from Aldous Webb," Olivia said from 2 feet behind Jack's left shoulder. Preston looked at her with the particular blankness of a man who had not expected to be addressed by her. "Webb's opinion is on file with the county land office as of Monday. The petition as filed is based on a misreading of the boundary notation. You can tell Mr. Mercer we'll see him at the hearing." Preston looked at her for a long moment. "Ma'am, this is a legal matter between the county land office and the property holder," she said, "which is Jack Anderson. The petition is answered. The stake is documented. The hearing will proceed on the merits." She kept her voice even and clear. Was there something else? Preston looked at Jack. Jack said nothing. He was watching Olivia with an expression she didn't have time to analyze. Preston turned his horse and rode out. Jack didn't move for a moment after the gate closed. "You knew about Webb's filing," he said. "I rode to Coulter Springs on Monday and delivered the document myself," she said. "I didn't tell you because I wanted to confirm it was received before I said anything." He turned and looked at her fully. The afternoon light was hard and direct, and she stood in it without flinching. "You rode to Coulter Springs alone," he said. 12 miles, she said. "I've done longer." He was quiet. "Are you angry?" she said. "No," he said. It came out with a roughness that wasn't anger. "No, I'm not angry." He walked back toward the barn. She watched him go and thought that roughness was something else. She knew what it sounded like in a man's voice when something has shifted that he wasn't expecting to shift. She went back inside. The day before the hearing, Cutter found her in the barn at dusk, doing something she had taken to doing in quiet moments, checking the horses, straightening the gear, making sure the things that needed to be ready were ready. He came in and leaned against the stall post with his arms folded. Not aggressive, just present. "You don't have to go to the hearing," he said. She looked at him. "Jack'll go," Cutter said. "Roy and me'll go if he needs witnesses. You don't have to put yourself up there." She understood what he was saying. The hearing would be public. Mercer's people would be there. There would be men in that room who would look at a woman who had inserted herself into a property dispute and draw conclusions she could not control. "I know," she said, "but you're going anyway." "I did the work," she said. "I want to see it hold." Cutter was quiet for a moment. He looked at the ground, then back at her. "When I first saw you come through that gate," he said, "I thought—" He stopped. "I know what you thought," she said. She said it without edge. "Yeah." He exhaled. "I was wrong." It was the most direct thing he had said to her in 6 weeks. She accepted it the same way she accepted everything, without making it larger than it was, because making it larger would have embarrassed him, and she had no interest in that. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He pushed off the post and walked out. At the barn door, he stopped. "For what it's worth," he said without turning around, "Jack's a better man when you're here, and the ranch is too." He walked out before she could answer. She stood in the quiet of the barn for a moment. Then she checked the last saddle strap and went inside to pack what she needed for the morning. The hearing was held in the county land office in Coulter Springs, in a room that was too small for the number of people who turned up. Mercer was there. She saw him for the first time in person. A compact, well-dressed man in his 50s, with the surface pleasantness of someone who had learned that pleasantness costs nothing and buys considerable advantage. He looked at Jack with the smile of a man who expected to win. He looked at Olivia with the brief, dismissive evaluation of a man who had already decided she didn't matter. She sat beside Jack at the respondent's table with the survey document, Webb's opinion, and her own written summary in a folder in front of her. Roy sat behind them. Cutter sat next to Roy with his hat in his hands and his jaw set. Mercer's lawyer presented first. He was fluent and practiced, and he made the creek boundary argument sound like established fact, rather than a convenient interpretation. He produced his 3 witnesses, men who worked Mercer land as Jack had said, but whose testimony was carefully worded to sound like independent recollection. When the land office examiner asked for the respondent's presentation, Jack looked at Olivia. She stood. Mercer's lawyer looked up from his notes. Mercer's pleasantness flickered. He had not expected her to be the one who stood. She presented the survey document first, its date, its language, the specific notation about the fixed stake, rather than the moving creek. She presented Webb's written opinion in full reading, the relevant sections in a clear, measured voice. Then she presented her own documented record of finding the stake. The date, the method, the witnesses present the measurements from the stake to the current creek bed that showed exactly how far the water had shifted in 50 years, while the stake, and therefore the legal boundary, had not moved at all. She spoke for 11 minutes. She did not raise her voice. She did not perform. She simply put one fact in front of another until the picture they made was undeniable. When she sat down, the room was quiet in a particular way, the quiet of people who have just heard something land. The examiner reviewed the documents. He asked 3 questions, all directed at Webb's opinion. She answered 2 of them herself. The third she deferred to Jack because it was about the property's operational history, and his word carried weight that hers did not yet carry in this county. The examiner deliberated for 20 minutes. He came back and ruled in favor of the Anderson Ranch. The petition was dismissed. The boundary, as stated in the original survey document, would stand. Mercer left without speaking. His lawyer packed his case. Roy said very quietly from the row behind, "Well, I'll be." Cutter made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was close to one. Jack sat for a moment without moving. Then he turned to Olivia. He didn't say thank you. He didn't say anything. He just looked at her with something so direct and so unguarded that she had to look away first, which was not something she was accustomed to doing. She straightened the papers in her folder. "Let's go home," she said. He stood. He put his hat on. He held the door for her on the way out, which he had not done before, and which meant nothing, and also meant something. They rode back to the ranch in the long afternoon light, all 4 of them. And nobody said much because the day had already said everything that needed saying. The ranch was quiet when they got back. The horses were in the corral. The kitchen garden was dark and full of things growing steadily toward autumn. Olivia went inside and put the coffee on. Jack came in and sat at the kitchen table, and she put a mug in front of him without being asked, and she sat across from him with her own mug, and for a while they just sat there, in the comfortable silence of 2 people who have been through something together and don't need to narrate it. "You knew we'd win," he said eventually. "I thought we would," she said. "I don't say things I'm not reasonably sure of." He turned his mug in his hands. "What if you'd been wrong? Then I'd have found another approach." She looked at him. "I told Cutter that. It's true." He nodded. He drank his coffee. "Mercer won't stop," she said. "Men like that don't stop. He'll find another angle." "I know," Jack said. "But now he knows we'll answer." He paused. "He knows I'll answer." She heard the weight in that correction. The shift from we back to I, the way he was still trying to hold the boundary between what she had done for the ranch and what it meant about the ranch's future. About his future. She let it pass. There would be time. There was autumn still ahead of them and all the work that came with it, and she was not a woman who rushed the things that needed to move at their own pace. She finished her coffee. She got up and started on supper. He stayed at the table and watched her, and neither of them said another word. And somehow that was the most important conversation they had ever had. Mercer's next move came not from a lawyer, but from a merchant. Olivia found out on a Friday, the same day she had ridden to Coulter Springs to settle the October supply order with the merchant Webb had recommended. She was standing at the counter going through the order sheet when the merchant's wife, a round, forthright woman named Della, who had taken an immediate liking to Olivia from their first meeting, leaned across the counter and lowered her voice. "You should know," Della said, "that a man came in here 2 weeks ago asking Gerald not to extend credit to the Anderson account. Said the ranch was a poor risk. Said there were legal questions about the property." Olivia kept her eyes on the order sheet. Did Gerald agree? Gerald told him the Anderson account had been paid on time for 11 years, and he wasn't interested in other people's opinions about it. Della folded her arms. "But he went to 3 other merchants in town. I know of 2 who listened." Olivia looked up. "Which 2?" Della told her. She finished the supply order paid in cash from the household account she kept in a locked tin under the kitchen floorboard, cash she had been accumulating from the savings on the reorganized, ordering enough now for 2 months of supplies without credit, if it came to that, and rode back to the ranch with the information sitting cold and purposeful in her mind. She found Jack in the barn. "Mercer's been working the merchants," she said, and she told him what Della had said, all of it without softening. Jack listened with his hands still on the fence rail he had been checking. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "The two who listened," he said. "Pharaoh's feed store and Hatch's dry goods." "Yes. We've had accounts there for 8 years. I know." She watched him absorb it. "It's not about the accounts. He's not trying to starve the ranch of supplies he knows we can source elsewhere, and he knows we know it now. He's trying to make you feel isolated, make it harder to operate so that eventually selling looks easier than fighting." Jack turned from the fence. His face had the flat, contained quality she had come to recognize as anger that he was managing rather than expressing. "He doesn't know you yet," he said. It wasn't quite a compliment. It was more like a fact he was only now fully calculating. "He will," she said. "That's all right. Let him." "What do you want to do?" She had already worked it through on the ride back. "We don't need Pharaoh or Hatch right now. Our stores are solid through November with the new ordering. But I want to pay both accounts in full in person and close them cleanly. Not in anger. Not with any word about Mercer. Just settle and close." She paused. "Let the town see that we're not scrambling. That we don't need credit because we're not in difficulty." Jack looked at her. "You want to make it look like a choice." "It is a choice," she said. "It just also happens to be strategic." He almost smiled. She was getting better at seeing when that almost smile was coming. "All right," he said. "I'll ride in Monday." "We'll ride in Monday," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, and she held his, and neither of them made anything of the we this time. They rode into Coulter Springs on Monday morning side by side, which was not something she had planned for effect, but which had an effect regardless. She was aware of it, the way a rancher of Jack's, standing riding into town, beside a woman, drew eyes, and she sat straight and rode easy and let it be what it was. At Pharaoh's, Jack paid the balance. He was courteous. He said the ranch was consolidating its ordering and thanked them for their years of service. Pharaoh looked uncomfortable, which told Olivia he knew why they were really there, and his discomfort told her further that he was not entirely at ease with the choice he had made. Good, she thought. At Hatch's, the interaction was cooler. Hatch was a man who had convinced himself that listening to Mercer was sound business judgment rather than the exercise of a personal preference for backing the larger power. He processed the payment without meeting Jack's eyes and said nothing of substance. On the way out, Olivia said pleasantly and just loud enough, "Thank you for your years of service to the ranch. I hope your other arrangements prove as reliable." She said it to Hatch directly, and he flushed because it was the kind of sentence that sounded perfectly civil and landed like a closed door. Jack said nothing until they were mounted and moving. "That was a precise thing to say," he said. "It was accurate," she said. He rode beside her in silence for a few minutes and then said, "You enjoy that, a little." She considered it honestly. "Sometimes," she said, "when it's earned." He laughed. It was the first time she had heard him laugh a real one. Not the half-sounds of near smiles, and it was low and brief, and completely genuine, and it rearranged something in her chest that she filed away to examine later. The autumn work hit in full force the last week of August. It came the way seasons always came on a working ranch, not gradually, but suddenly all at once, everything due at the same time. The harvest from the kitchen garden, which had exceeded Olivia's own August projections, needed to be processed and stored. The water channels needed clearing before the first freeze. The cattle that had been on summer range needed to be brought in and assessed, and the weaker animals culled before winter feed costs made them a liability. The barn roof had a section that had been losing shingles since the summer storm and needed to be fixed before the cold rains came. Olivia made a list. She made it the way she made all her lists, prioritized by consequence, not by preference, starting with the things that would cost the most, if they were left. She showed it to Jack at breakfast. He read through it without comment. When he got to the barn roof, he said, "I was going to do that myself." "You have the cattle to manage," she said. "Roy and Cutter have the water channels. I'll do the roof." He looked up from the list. "You'll do the roof." "I've done it before," she said. The Drummond camp had a cook tent that needed re-shingling every spring. Same principle. That's a cook tent. A roof is a roof. He looked at her steadily, and she looked back at him steadily, and they had the argument without any more words than that. He took the list back. He wrote Olivia Roof with Roy to assist as available in the margin. Roy on the ground, he said. Not you. I don't want you up there alone. Roy's on the channels. Roy does the channels in the morning and assists on the roof in the afternoon. He put the list on the table between them. That's not negotiable. She recognized when she was getting what she had asked for with a condition attached, and the condition was reasonable. All right, she said. He picked up his coffee. You're going to do the roof anyway, aren't you, whether I say so or not? I told you I'd wait for Roy, she said. That's not what I asked. She met his eyes. Yes, she said. I was going to do it either way. He drank his coffee. He was not angry. He was something more complicated than angry, a man navigating the gap between needing someone's capability and being uneasy about the specific ways that capability exceeded his ability to protect them. Be careful, he said. I'm always careful, she said. No, he said quietly. You're always competent. Those aren't the same thing. She didn't have a quick answer for that. It was too accurate. The roof took 2 days. Roy handed shingles up and held the ladder and made no comment about the situation, except to say at the end of the first day that she nailed faster than the last man who'd done the job, which she suspected was the most direct praise he was capable of producing. On the second day, Cutter showed up in the afternoon without being asked. He didn't say anything about it. He just took the extra hammer from the barn and climbed up and started nailing on the far section. She worked her section. He worked his. They met in the middle, which happened to be the section over the kitchen. Thank you, she said. Goes faster with 2, he said. They finished the roof by late afternoon. When Jack came in from the cattle work and looked up and saw the new shingles running clean and even across the full width of the barn roof, he stopped his horse in the yard and looked for a long moment. He didn't say anything about the roof. He said, Cutter's been in a better way lately. He's a good worker, she said. He just needed to be pointed at the right things. Most men do, Jack said. He was looking at the roof, not at her, but his voice had a quality that told her they were not entirely talking about Cutter. The garden harvest went into the root cellar in careful order: beets and carrots in layers of dry sand, potatoes in slatted crates, dried beans in linen bags, onions braided and hung. The herb bundles from the south bed, which had turned out to be rosemary, sage, thyme, and something she was fairly sure was a variety of mint that Clara Anderson had planted and tended and left behind in the soil for someone else to find, she hung from the kitchen ceiling where they would dry properly, and where she thought privately they probably should have been all along. Jack came into the kitchen one morning and stopped and looked at the ceiling, the way he had looked at the trough and the roof and the survey document, with the expression of a man steadily revising his accounting of what was possible. She had those, he said, meaning the herbs. I know, Olivia said. I thought they should keep going. He stood for a long moment with his hat in his hands, and she let him stand there, because she understood that sometimes a person needed a minute with their own grief, and it did not require any intervention. She'd have liked you, he said. It landed quietly, and she let it. I hope so, she said. He put his hat back on and went out. The second letter from Mercer came on a Thursday in mid-September. It was not from a lawyer this time. It was in Mercer's own hand, a short note formally worded, but personal, in the way that personal threats always manage to be when they're written by men who've learned to keep their hands clean. He proposed a meeting. He proposed it in the language of neighborly resolution. He said there was no need for continued conflict. He said he believed there was an arrangement that would suit both parties. Jack read it at the kitchen table, while Olivia cleared the breakfast things. He wants to meet, Jack said. He wants to make an offer in person, she said, where he can watch your face. I know. Jack set the letter down. What do you think the offer is? He'll offer to buy the South 40 at above market rate, she said. Enough to make it feel like winning. It won't be the land he actually wants that comes later. He buys the South 40, establishes that you're willing to sell, and then uses that willingness as the foundation for the next conversation and the one after that. Jack looked at her. You've seen this before. The Drummond camp had a neighbor who worked the same way, she said. He got 300 acres before Drummond understood what was happening. What did Drummond do? He finally stopped meeting with him, she said. Once you stop going to the table, the game changes. Jack picked up the letter and read it again. Put it down. If I don't respond, he'll say I'm being unreasonable. That I'm the one who won't settle things civilly. Let him say it, she said. You answered his petition at the land office. That's the civil resolution. You don't owe him a private meeting on top of it. Jack was quiet for a long time, long enough that she started on the lunch preparations and let him think. Write me a response, he said eventually. She turned. Short, he said. Firm. The kind of letter that closes a door without slamming it. She dried her hands. She got the paper and the pen. She sat across from him at the kitchen table and wrote while he watched, and he made 2 small suggestions. And she incorporated both because they were good suggestions. And when she read the finished letter back to him, it was exactly what he had asked for, a door closed without drama. Sign it, she said, and slid it across to him. He signed it. He folded it. He looked at her across the table. What happens when he gets this? He said. He'll be angry, she said. And then he'll calculate. And then he'll decide whether you're worth the continued effort or whether there are easier targets. And if he decides we're worth it, then we handle the next thing, she said. The same way we've handled everything else. He held the folded letter and looked at her for a long moment. There was something building in his face that she had been tracking for weeks now. Something that was gathering weight and momentum the way weather gathered before it broke. Olivia, he said. She waited. He looked down at the letter. I want to ask you something, he said, and I want you to answer it straight because I think you're the only person I know who will. Go ahead, she said. If the ranch were in good order, he said, stable, no Mercer problem, no legal trouble running clean, would you... He stopped. Tried again. Is this place something you'd want to stay at? Not because it needs you, but because you... He stopped again, and she could see the difficulty of it for him. A man who had learned to speak in practicalities, trying to find the door into a different kind of conversation. Because I want to, she said, finishing it for him. He looked up. Yes, she said. Simply, straight, the way he had asked for. He sat with that for a moment. Okay, he said. Quiet. Okay. He got up and took his hat from the hook by the door. He paused with his hand on the doorframe. The south pasture fence needs a second look this afternoon, he said. I know, she said. I already put it on the list. He went out. She heard his boots on the porch and then the yard and then fading the way his steps always faded toward whatever the ranch needed next. She sat at the table with the pen still in her hand and the blank space in front of her where the letter had been. Then she got up and went back to the range. Roy found her at the well that evening drawing water for the kitchen. He took the handle without being asked and worked it while she held the bucket, and they stood together in the fading light with the comfortable ease of 2 people who had been working the same ground long enough to stop explaining themselves to each other. He's different, Roy said. He didn't need to say who. People change when things get better, she said. It's more than that. Roy stopped cranking. He used to come in at night and just sit in that chair in the front room, and you could see him deciding whether any of it was worth it, whether the fight was worth the cost. He handed her the full bucket. He doesn't do that anymore. She took the bucket and said nothing. I've worked this ranch 3 years, Roy said. I've never seen him ask anyone for help with anything. Not the legal trouble, not the money trouble, not any of it. He paused. He asked you. He asked the agency, she said. He asked you, Roy repeated. There's a difference, and you know it. She did know it. She had known it for a while. "Roy," she said. Mind your business," she said. But she said it without any real force behind it, and he heard that, and he walked back toward the bunkhouse with the particular satisfied quiet of a man who has said what he came to say. She carried the bucket inside. The kitchen was warm. The herbs were drying on the ceiling. The new shingles were tight on the barn roof. The south boundary was staked and documented and filed with the county. The supply ledger was balanced. The root cellar was full. She stood in the middle of the kitchen and took stock of all of it, the way she took stock of everything practically clearly, without pretending it was more or less than it was. It was a good ranch. It was in good order. It was going to be fine. She lit the lamp and started supper. She was at the range when she heard Jack come in. Not the back door this time, which was the work entrance, but the front door, which meant he had gone around, which was unusual. She heard him hang his hat, heard him stop in the front room. Then she heard him walk to the kitchen doorway. She didn't turn around. "Supper's 20 minutes, she said. "I'm not here about supper," he said. The quietness of it made her still her hands on the pot handle. She turned around. He was standing in the doorway, with his arms at his sides, and the expression on his face was the most unguarded she had ever seen. It a man who had come to the end of all his careful managed distance, and arrived somewhere new, and was standing in it without knowing quite what came next. "I wrote that letter today," he said, "and I sat on the south fence for an hour after, and I kept thinking about what you said, that you'd want to stay. Not because the ranch needs you." He stopped. "Because of that, not because." He looked at her directly. "I need you to know that I—" He stopped again, and this time she did not fill the silence because what was in his face was something a man had to find the words for himself. "I need you to know that I see you," he said. "Not what you do here, you. I see you, Olivia." The kitchen was completely quiet. She set the pot handle down. "I know," she said. "I see you too." He stood in the doorway, and she stood at the range, and neither of them moved yet, because some moments are large enough that you have to let them settle before you can walk through them. The lamp burned between them. The herbs moved faintly in the warm air from the stove. Outside the ranch was quiet and whole, and waiting for tomorrow. He didn't kiss her that night. She had half expected it standing there in the kitchen with the lamp between them, and everything said that needed saying. But Jack was not a man who moved on the momentum of a moment. He was a man who decided things fully before he acted on them, and she understood that about him the same way she understood the survey document and the supply ledger clearly without needing it to be different than it was. He came back to the kitchen doorway and said, "Sit with me a while." And she turned the range down and sat at the table with him, and they talked. Really talked. Not about the ranch. Not about Mercer. Not about anything that needed to be managed for 2 hours in the lamplight, while the night settled around the house, and the horses shifted in the corral, and the whole property breathed in and out in the dark. He told her about Clara. Not the grief of it, he had given her glimpses of that already, and she had learned not to push at them. He told her about who Clara had been, the way she laughed, the garden she had built from bare caliche ground by sheer stubbornness, the way she had insisted on learning to ride because she said she refused to be a woman who needed fetching. "She sounds like someone I'd have liked," Olivia said. "She would have argued with you constantly," Jack said. "And she would have respected you for it. She had no patience for people who folded." "Neither do I know," he said. He looked at her across the table with the steady gray eyes that she had learned to read the slight differences between thinking and deciding, between watching and seeing. Right now he was seeing. "I've known that since the first day. When you told me you had nowhere else to be and you were still the least frightened person on the property." "I was a little frightened," she said. He looked surprised. "Of what?" "Of wanting this too much," she said, "and having it not work out." He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't show it." "Showing it doesn't help anything," she said. "So I just worked." He reached across the table and put his hand over hers. His hand was large and calloused and warm, and he did it the way he did everything without drama, completely certain. "It worked out," he said. She turned her hand over and held his. Yes, she said, it did. He asked her properly on a Sunday morning 3 weeks into October. She was in the garden pulling the last of the season's carrots when she heard him come out the back door and cross the yard. She didn't look up. She had learned that Jack approached important things sideways like a man who needed to get close to something large before he could look at it directly. He crouched down beside her in the dirt, which she had not expected, and she looked at him then. He was holding something in his hand. A ring. Small, simple. A band of silver with a single flat stone, turquoise the color of the sky, in the early morning before the heat came up. It was not new. She could see that from the wear on the band. This was my mother's, he said. She gave it to me when I left home and told me to give it to the right woman. I gave it to Clara. He held it steadily. Clara told me before she died that if I found someone right again, I shouldn't be stupid about it. He looked at Olivia straight on the way. He looked at everything he was certain of. I'm trying not to be stupid about it. She sat back on her heels in the garden dirt with her hands full of carrots and looked at him, this large, careful, honest man crouching in the soil beside her, like it was the most natural position in the world for a proposal. You could have asked me inside, she said. You were out here, he said, and I didn't want to wait. She looked at the ring. She thought about the woman who had worn it before her the garden, the stubbornness, the refusal to be someone who needed fetching, and she thought it was probably the most appropriate piece of jewelry anyone could have offered her. Yes, she said, straight, no decoration. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. She hadn't expected it to fit, but it did. He stayed crouched beside her for a moment, looking at her hand. Clara would have approved, he said. You said she would have argued with me. Same thing, he said. She laughed, and then he laughed, and they stayed in the garden in the October dirt with the last of the season's carrots between them and the whole settled length of the ranch around them, and it was not romantic in any way that a story would usually describe romance, and it was exactly right. Roy found out at breakfast. He came in, sat down, looked at Olivia's left hand when she set his coffee mug down, and said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then, well. He picked up his mug. About time. Cutter came in 5 minutes later. He sat. He looked at Olivia's hand. He looked at Jack. He looked back at his plate. Congratulations, he said. He said it to his eggs mostly. Thank you, Cutter, Olivia said. He forked a bite and chewed and said without looking up, I'll need to know if anything changes about the way the operation runs. Nothing changes, she said. He nodded, apparently satisfied, and ate his breakfast. She understood that this was Cutter's version of a warm reception, and she accepted it fully. Jack across the table was drinking his coffee with the expression of a man who had made a decision he was completely at peace with, which was the same expression he wore when the cattle count came in right or the fence line held through a hard week. Contentment for Jack looked like the absence of worry rather than the presence of joy. She had learned to read it accurately. We'll ride to Coulter Springs this week, he said. See Pastor Reeve. I don't need a ceremony, she said. I know you don't, he said. I want one, small, on the property. I want people to see it done right. She considered that. Who would you invite? Roy and Cutter. Della and Gerald from the supply store. Aldous Webb, he deserves to be there. Maybe 4 or 5 others from town who've been fair to the ranch. He paused. Margaret Hale, if you don't object. She raised an eyebrow. She's a decent woman, he said, and she was gracious about it. A beat. She sent a note after the hearing, said the ranch was fortunate to have good management. That's a polite way to put it, Olivia said. She meant it as a compliment, he said. I took it as one. Invite her, Olivia said. Dad. The word got out before they could manage it, because the word always got out in small counties, and it traveled in the particular way that news traveled in communities where people had been watching a situation and waiting to see how it resolved. Della told 3 people and was sorry about it immediately, and told Olivia as much when Olivia wrote in for supplies on Wednesday. I know, Olivia said without heat. It's all right, Della. Some of the talk is nice, Della said. And some of it, she pursed her lips. The kind that isn't nice. Olivia said. Tell me exactly what it says. Della looked uncomfortable. There are people who think you planned it. That you came out here from the agency with the intention of... She stopped. That it wasn't an honest placement. Olivia was quiet for a moment, not hurt, thinking. Who specifically? She said. Hatch, Della said. And a woman named Carver, who I think has opinions about everything and is wrong about half of them. What does Mercer's camp say? Della looked surprised that she asked it that directly. I don't know, she said. Nothing yet. But Mercer will find a way to use it if he can, Olivia said. She picked up her supply order. Thank you, Della, for telling me straight. She rode back, thinking not about the gossip itself. Gossip was a weather event. You managed it the same way you managed rain, by building good drainage and waiting. But about the specific risk that Mercer would find a way to weaponize the marriage. A question of property rights. Of whether a woman who had come in on a placement agreement and then married the rancher had some claim that could complicate the title. She was not a lawyer, but she knew enough to know the question existed. She found Jack in the barn. We need to speak to Pastor Reeve this week and not next week, she said. He heard the change in her tone. What happened? She told him. All of it, including the Mercer angle. He listened with his hands on the stall gate, and she watched him move from stillness to the particular controlled tension that she had learned preceded action. You think Mercer would try to challenge the property title through the marriage, he said. I think Mercer looks for threads, she said. And I think the fastest way to eliminate this thread is to make sure the marriage is on record and clean before he finds it. Friday, Jack said. Friday, she said. They went to Pastor Reeve on Friday and came back married on Friday afternoon. It was not the ceremony Jack had planned. The gathered friends, the ranch yard, the October light. That was still coming. But the legal record was made signed and witnessed, and when they rode back through the gate and into the yard, Olivia Anderson felt the ground under the horse's hooves with a clarity that was different from every previous time she had crossed that threshold. Roy was waiting at the barn. He had figured out from the combined signals of their early departure and the particular expression Jack had worn at breakfast what the ride to Coulter Springs was for. He took Jack's horse without comment and said, I put the coffee on, which was the most domestic thing she had ever heard him say, and which made her smile all the way into the kitchen. That evening, Cutter came in for supper and sat down and pushed an envelope across the table to her without explanation. She opened it. Inside was a folded piece of paper. On it, in Cutter's careful, labored handwriting, was a list of 8 names ranching families, neighbors she had heard mentioned, but not met people up and down the county. What is this? She said. People who respect the Anderson name, Cutter said. He was looking at his plate. And who'll respect yours now? If Mercer goes to any of them talking trouble, they'll know who he is. He picked up his fork. I rode around yesterday, talked to a few of them, just so they know. She stared at him. Don't make it into something, he said. She folded the list and put it in her apron pocket. Thank you, Cutter. Food's getting cold, he said. She served the table. Roy ate with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had watched a story go the right direction. Jack ate with his knee touching hers under the table, which he had never done before, and which she decided not to remark on, and also intended to think about for the rest of the evening. Mercer's move came 10 days later, and it was not what she had expected. A letter arrived from his lawyer not to Jack, but addressed to her, to Mrs. Olivia Anderson, which told her immediately that Mercer had accepted the marriage as fact and recalculated. She read it alone at the kitchen table before Jack came in from the morning work. It was not a threat. It was an offer. Mercer wanted to hire her. He phrased it elaborately and at length, but that was what it amounted to. He was opening a second property, a larger operation, and he required someone of demonstrated management ability to run the household and administrative side. The compensation he listed was more than twice what Jack paid her, had paid her before the marriage changed the nature of the arrangement entirely. He was trying to buy her out of the ranch, not the land this time. Her competence, her presence, her influence over the operation. He had lost the legal fight and the merchant campaign, and he had recalculated to the correct conclusion: the Anderson Ranch had become resistant to his methods because of her, and the fastest way to dismantle that resistance was to remove her from it. She sat with the letter for a while. She was not tempted. She needed to be honest with herself about that. She was not tempted, and the reason she was not tempted was not only Jack and not only the ring on her hand. It was the trough she had sealed, and the roof she had shingled, and the garden she had grown from someone else's stubborn planted rose. It was Roy's coffee mug, and Cutter's list of 8 names, and the beets in the root cellar in layers of dry sand. It was the survey stake she had helped dig from the ground, solid and iron, and 50 years old, and exactly where it was supposed to be. You don't leave a place you've built. She folded the letter and put it in the drawer where she kept the documents that needed to be answered carefully. When Jack came in, she handed it to him without comment. He read it. His face went through several things in the space of 30 seconds. "He's trying to take you," he said, quiet. The particular quiet that was not calm. "He's trying to solve his problem," she said. "We're going to let him know it doesn't work. I'll write the response," he said. "We'll write it together," she said. He looked at her. Then he sat down and pulled the paper toward him. She sat beside him, not across from him this time. Beside. And they wrote the letter together, sentence by sentence, and it was the shortest letter she had ever composed, because the situation required exactly 3 things: a refusal, a clarity, and a finality. When it was done, Jack read it aloud. It was 11 lines. It was entirely sufficient. "That's it," she said. "That's it," he agreed. He signed it. She did not sign it. It was his name on the ranch, his legal standing with Mercer, and she understood the difference between the authority she held and the authority she didn't yet, in the eyes of the county, hold fully. But she had written half the sentences. Mercer would feel that, even if he couldn't name it. The celebration came on the last Saturday of October. Della and Gerald arrived in their buckboard at noon with a covered dish, and Della's opinion on how the kitchen herbs should be rearranged, which Olivia listened to politely and intended to ignore. Aldous Webb came alone on his gray mare, shook Jack's hand, shook Olivia's hand with both of his, and said, "I told my wife